Blood dripped onto the imported Persian rug, the only sound in the dead, silent room. Clara leaned heavily against the mahogany doorframe, her usually vibrant face pale and battered. "Sorry I'm late," she whispered. Arthur Costello's cold eyes dropped, and he realized the woman he loved could barely walk. Arthur Costello was not a man who waited. As the undisputed head of the Costello Syndicate in Boston, time was the one commodity he dictated, not the other way around. Yet as the minute hand on his Patek Philippe watch swept past midnight, a cold, unfamiliar knot tightened in his chest. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office at the back of the Obsidian Club, watching the torrential rain batter the glass. The city below was a blur of neon and darkness, mirroring the sudden unease churning within him. Clara Higgins was exactly 45 minutes late. To anyone else in his ruthless organization, tardiness was an insult punishable by severe, often bloody, consequences. But Clara was different. She was his brilliant, indispensable forensic accountant, the only person who knew exactly where every dirty dollar was buried, cleaned, and reinvested. More than that, though it was a secret Arthur guarded with his life, Clara was the only woman who had ever managed to bypass the iron walls around his heart. Clara was not the typical woman associated with the mafia elite. She wasn't a towering, waif-thin supermodel draped in diamonds, nor was she a hardened mob daughter. She was a plus-size woman with soft, abundant curves, a sharp wit, and a mind that operated like a supercomputer. For years, Clara had moved through the world feeling invisible, mocked for her weight, and overlooked by men who couldn't see past their own shallow conditioning. But Arthur saw her. From the moment she bravely marched into his office 2 years ago to negotiate her gambling-addicted brother's debt, Arthur had been captivated by her defiance, her intelligence, and her undeniable, lush beauty. He had hired her on the spot, ostensibly to work off her brother's impossible debt, but in reality, he just wanted her near. Over the months, late-night auditing sessions over takeout had blossomed into stolen glances, hushed conversations, and a quiet, fiercely private romance. Clara was his anchor in a sea of blood and betrayal, and Clara was never late. A sharp knock shattered the heavy silence of the room. Before Arthur could command entry, the heavy mahogany doors creaked open. Arthur turned, the reprimand dying instantly on his tongue. All the air evaporated from the room. Clara stood in the doorway, though stood was a generous term. She was leaning entirely against the heavy wood frame, her breathing ragged and shallow. Her normally pristine trench coat was soaked through with rain and dark, heavy stains that Arthur's seasoned eyes immediately recognized as blood. Her thick, dark hair was matted to her forehead, and a vicious purple contusion swelled along her left cheekbone, nearly swelling her eye shut. But it was her stance that sent a paralyzing shock of terror through the Mafia Boss. Her right leg was bent at an unnatural, sickening angle, incapable of bearing any weight. She was trembling violently, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe just to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. "Clara," Arthur breathed, the sound tearing out of him. A rare, vulnerable fracture in the feared boss's composure. She looked up at him through her good eye, a weak, apologetic smile grazing her split lip. "Sorry I'm late," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken rasp. Then the last of her strength gave out. Her grip slipped from the wood, and she pitched forward. Arthur crossed the massive room with a terrifying, explosive speed. He caught her before she hit the Persian rug, dropping to his knees and gathering her heavy, soft frame into his arms. The sheer force of his panic was entirely foreign to a man who had built an empire on calculated cruelty. Clara. "Clara, look at me," he commanded, his hands shaking as he cradled the back of her head, feeling the sticky warmth of fresh blood matting her hair. "Who did this? Just give me a name, Kara. Give me a name." She groaned in agony as he shifted her, her hands instinctively clutching at his tailored suit lapels. It hurts, Artie. Everything hurts." "I know, baby, I know. I've got you," Arthur murmured, pulling her flush against his chest. He didn't care about the blood ruining his bespoke suit or soaking into the priceless rug. He scooped her up, gritting his teeth against the sheer rage boiling in his veins, and carried her toward the massive Chesterfield leather sofa in the center of the room. He laid her down with a gentleness that contradicted the lethal violence he was known for, arranging her bruised, lush body as if she were made of spun glass. His eyes scanned the damage, his tactical mind taking over, even as his heart pounded against his ribs, the broken leg, the defensive wounds on her forearms, the split lip, the blunt force trauma to her head. This wasn't a random mugging. A mugger would have snatched her purse and ran. This was a beating, a systematic, deliberate attempt to break her. Arthur reached for his desk phone, smashing a button that connected directly to his outer security detail. "Get Sal in here right now and call Doc Harrison. Tell him if he's not here in exactly 10 minutes with a trauma kit, I will skin him alive." He slammed the phone down and returned to Clara's side, dropping to his knees beside the sofa. She was shivering violently, going into shock. He stripped off his suit jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders, tucking it around her curves to preserve her body heat. "Artie," she whimpered, her eyes fluttering as she fought to stay conscious. "The ledgers, they took the flash drive." Arthur froze. The flash drive. Clara carried an encrypted drive containing the offshore routing numbers for the syndicate's clean money. "To hell with the money," Arthur snarled softly, pressing a kiss to her clammy, blood-streaked forehead. "I don't care about the drive. I care about you. You're safe now. Nobody touches you here." But as he stared down at the battered woman who held his soul, Arthur Costello knew one terrifying truth. Someone had touched her. Someone had looked at Clara, his sweet, brilliant, beautiful Clara, and decided to tear her apart. And before then rose over Boston. Someone was going to die, a very slow, very agonizing death. The arrival of Dr. Harrison was a blur of frantic, highly orchestrated chaos. The underground physician, a man who had stitched up countless bullet holes and knife wounds for the Costello family, burst into the office exactly 9 minutes later, out of breath and carrying 2 massive black medical bags. He took one look at Arthur's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated murder, and immediately got to work without asking a single question. Arthur refused to leave the room. He stood like a gargoyle in the shadows, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles cracked, watching as the doctor carefully cut away the ruined fabric of Clara's trousers to expose the damage to her leg. "Compound fracture of the tibia, Arthur," Dr. Harrison muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "She took a brutal hit. Looks like a lead pipe or a baseball bat. 2 broken ribs, severe lacerations, and a mild concussion. She needs a hospital." "She stays here," Arthur rumbled, his voice dropping to a terrifying, vibrating bass. "You fix her here, Doc. No records, no questions." Dr. Harrison swallowed hard, nodding quickly. I'll need to set the bone and cast it. I'm going to push morphine. It's going to hurt her before it helps. Arthur stepped out of the shadows, kneeling by Clara's head once more. He took her soft, trembling hand in his large, calloused one. I'm right here, Clara. Squeeze my hand. Break it if you have to. As the doctor injected the painkiller and began the agonizing process of setting her shattered leg, Clara let out a muffled, tearful scream, her fingers clamping down on Arthur's hand with surprising strength. He murmured quiet reassurances into her ear, pressing his lips to her temple, ignoring the metallic scent of her blood. It was a profound contrast, this terrifying mafia boss, a man who had ordered executions over dinner, whispering sweet, desperate comforts to the curvy, brilliant woman writhing in agony on his couch. By the time the leg was set and splinted, and the lacerations stitched, Clara was floating on a heavy cloud of morphine. The physical pain had dulled to a distant throb, but the emotional terror of the night still clung to her. Dr. Harrison packed his bags, gave Arthur strict instructions on her medication, and fled the office as quickly as he had arrived. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut. They were alone again. Arthur poured a glass of whiskey, his hands shaking for the first time in 10 years. He downed it in one burning gulp before dragging a chair to the edge of the sofa. He sat, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he studied her bruised face. "Clara," he began, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Tell me exactly what happened. Walk me through it." Clara swallowed thickly, the morphine making her tongue feel heavy. "I was leaving my apartment. I had the drive. I was coming to give you the quarterly laundering reports. I went down to the parking garage." She squeezed her eyes shut as the memory flashed behind her eyelids. 2 men, wearing ski masks. They came out of nowhere. "Did they say anything?" Arthur asked, his thumb gently stroking the unbruised side of her face. "They asked for the drive," she whispered. "I tried to run, Artie. I really did. But I'm not exactly built for sprinting." A sad, self-deprecating chuckle escaped her, ending in a wince as her broken ribs protested. "They caught me easily. One of them hit my leg with a pipe. When I fell, they went through my bag and took the drive." Arthur's eyes darkened at her self-deprecating comment about her weight. He had spent months trying to undo the years of damage society had done to her self-esteem, worshipping every inch of her soft, lush body, until she finally believed she was beautiful. Hearing her mock herself now, in the aftermath of such violence, fueled his rage. "Don't do that. You fought. You survived. That makes you stronger than anyone in my crew," Arthur said firmly. "Did you notice anything else? A tattoo? A voice? A car?" Clara hesitated. Her heart rate monitor, hooked up by the doctor, began to beep a little faster. She looked away, staring at the leather backrest of the sofa. "Clara," Arthur pressed gently, but with an underlying edge of command. "What aren't you telling me?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her bruised cheeks. "Artie, the man who hit me. His mask slipped when he swung the pipe. Just for a second." "Who was it?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of an executioner's axe. "It was Thomas," she sobbed. "Thomas Maranzano. But Artie, he didn't act alone." Arthur froze. Thomas Maranzano was a low-level enforcer, a brute. But he wasn't smart to orchestrate an interception of the encrypted drive. Someone had to have told him where Clara would be and what she was carrying. "Who gave the order, Clara? Who did Thomas call after he took the drive?" Clara looked back at him, terrified. "He called someone to confirm they got the data. I heard the voice on the speakerphone, Artie. I've audited his expense accounts for 2 years. I know his voice." She took a shuddering breath. "It was Leo." The silence in the room became absolute. The ambient noise of the Boston rain outside seemed to vanish. Leo Romano, Arthur's underboss, his right-hand man, the man who had stood beside him at his father's funeral. Leo had been skimming from the construction unions, and 3 days ago, Clara had privately informed Arthur that she was close to proving it with the offshore accounts on that very flash drive. Leo hadn't just stolen the drive to protect himself. He had ordered a brutal hit on the woman Arthur loved to silence her. A terrifying, hollow darkness settled over Arthur's features. The gentle, frantic Carrefour, lover Hinso from 20 minutes ago vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless head of the Costello syndicate. He stood up slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his blood-stained shirt. "Rest now, Mia Luce," Arthur said, his tone devoid of any emotion, which terrified Clara more than any shouting would have. "I have a sudden change in management to take care of." Rain lashed relentlessly against the bulletproof windshield of the armored Mercedes G-Class as it tore through the deserted, slick streets of Boston. Inside the cavernous cabin, the atmosphere was suffocatingly dense. Arthur Costello gripped the leather steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his jaw locked in a rigid line of barely contained fury. In the passenger seat, his most trusted enforcer, Salvatore Sal Rossi, rapidly loaded a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun in the dark, the metallic clicks of the magazines echoing like a metronome ticking down to a bloodbath. Arthur's mind was a dangerous, fractured place. Half of his soul remained back at the Obsidian Club. Hovering over the heavy Chesterfield sofa, where Clara lay heavily medicated, her soft, beautiful curves battered and broken by men who were not fit to breathe the same air as her. The other half of his mind, the icy, calculating mob boss who had ruled the Boston underworld with an iron fist, was actively planning the logistics of a massacre. "Thomas Maranzano," Arthur finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a shiver even down Sal's hardened spine. "Where is he, Sal?" Sal tapped his encrypted tablet. "He skipped his usual haunts, but one of our street soldiers just spotted his black Dodge Charger parked behind a processing warehouse down in Newmarket Square, the old butchery on Massachusetts Avenue. It's a dead zone, boss. Perfect place to hide out if you know you've got a target on your back." Arthur didn't reply. He simply slammed his foot onto the accelerator, the massive engine roaring as they sped toward the industrial meat-packing district. The raw injustice of it burned in Arthur's chest. Clara, who had spent her entire life trying to shrink into the background to avoid the cruel taunts about her weight, who possessed a brilliant mind and a heart of pure gold, had been brutalized for a flash drive. She had looked at Arthur with such shame, apologizing for being late while her leg was shattered. That image would haunt him until he died. 10 minutes later, the Mercedes killed its headlights, rolling silently into the flooded alleyway behind the dilapidated Newmarket Square butchery. The stench of old blood, rust, and rotting refuse hung heavy in the damp air. Arthur stepped out of the vehicle, retrieving a suppressed Kimber 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster. He didn't wait for Sal to take point. He kicked the rusted side door of the warehouse, with a force that snapped the heavy deadbolt completely off the frame. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dimly lit by flickering, caged industrial bulbs. The air was freezing, preserved from the days when sides of beef hung from the ceiling tracks. Sitting at a folding card table in the center of the room, clutching a duffel bag and a cheap burner phone, was Thomas Maranzano. Thomas jumped up, his chair clattering loudly against the concrete floor. He reached for his waistband, but Sal was already in the room. His submachine gun raised. "I wouldn't," Arthur advised quietly, stepping fully into the light. His bespoke suit was ruined, stained with Clara's blood, making him look less like a sophisticated businessman and more like the Grim Reaper. Thomas froze, trembling violently as he took in the sight of the boss. "Mr. Costello, I swear to God I was just following orders. I didn't want to do it." Arthur closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. He holstered his weapon, grabbing Thomas by the throat and slamming the hulking enforcer back against a rusted metal pillar. The sheer, brute strength of the mob boss lifted Thomas inches off the floor. "You touched her," Arthur whispered, the deadly calm in his voice far more terrifying than if he had screamed. "You took a steel pipe, and you struck the woman I love. You broke her bones. You made her bleed." "Leo!" Thomas choked out, clawing desperately at Arthur's unyielding grip. "It was Leo. He said the fat accountant had the ledgers. He said she was going to rat him out to the commission. He ordered the hit, Arthur. I just did what the underboss told me to do." Arthur's eyes went completely dead. He hated that word. He hated the way Thomas spat it out, a cruel, dismissive label for the most magnificent woman Arthur had ever known. "Her name," Arthur said softly, drawing a sleek, custom-forged stiletto blade from his inner pocket, "is Clara." The scream that erupted from Thomas Maranzano echoed through the empty meat-packing district, swallowed quickly by the howling Boston storm. By the time Arthur stepped back, meticulously wiping the blade on Thomas's shirt, he had exactly what he needed. Thomas had confessed that the encrypted flash drive had already been handed off. Leo Romano wasn't just hiding his embezzlement. He was using the financial data on that drive to buy his way into a partnership with the Russian Bratva operating out of Brighton. It was a full-scale coup paid for with Clara's blood. Arthur turned to Sal, stepping over the groaning, bleeding enforcer on the floor. "Call the cleaners for this piece of trash. Then, get the men ready. We are going to the Boston Harbor Hotel." Tonight, the Costello Syndicate gets a new underboss. The drive to the waterfront was a silent one. The city lights blurred outside the window. But all Arthur could see was Clara's swollen, bruised face. Leo had severely underestimated him. Leo assumed Arthur kept Clara around simply because she was good with numbers. He had no idea that he had just declared war on a man who would gladly burn the entire eastern seaboard to ash just to keep her warm. The presidential suite at the Boston Harbor Hotel offered a panoramic view of the dark, churning harbor. The opulent room bathed in the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Leo Romano stood near the wet bar, swirling a glass of expensive Macallan 25, a smug, triumphant smile plastered across his sharp features. On the heavy oak coffee table sat Clara's encrypted flash drive. Across from Leo sat two heavily tattooed lieutenants of the Brighton Bratva, finalizing the terms of their new, treacherous alliance. Leo was just raising his glass for a toast when the heavy double doors of the suite exploded inward. The heavy wood splintered violently, raining down on the plush carpet. Before the Russian lieutenants could even reach into their jackets, the room was swarming with Costello enforcers. Sal Rossi stepped in first, his MP5 leveled directly at the Bratva men, barking a sharp order in Russian that froze them in their tracks. Then Arthur Costello walked into the suite. The smugness evaporated from Leo's face in an instant, replaced by a pale, sickening dread. The glass of Macallan slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. He looked at Arthur, taking in the blood-soaked shirt, the cold, murderous eyes, and the gun gripped loosely in his right hand. "Arthur," Leo stammered, raising his hand slowly. "Let's be reasonable. The girl, she was framing me. I swear to you. She was cooking the books to make it look like I was skimming. I had to secure the drive, to prove my innocence." Arthur didn't blink. He walked slowly across the expansive suite, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. He stopped right in front of the coffee table, reaching down to pocket the flash drive. "You're a liar, Leo," Arthur said, his voice a chilling monotone. "But worse than that, you're a fool. You stole from my family. You colluded with the Russians. But I could have forgiven the money. I could have handled the betrayal." Arthur took another step forward, the barrel of the Kimber 1911 now pressing directly against Leo's sternum. Leo's bravado cracked entirely. He sneered, a desperate, cornered animal lashing out. "You're throwing away a 10-year partnership over a woman? Over her? Look at you, Arthur. You're the king of Boston, and you're ready to burn your own empire down for some fat, pathetic numbers cruncher who can't even run away when cornered." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Bratva men held their breath. Arthur's face didn't twist in anger. It just went completely, unnervingly still. He leaned in close to his former right-hand man, the scent of expensive cologne and cold sweat filling his nostrils. "That numbers cruncher," Arthur whispered, "is the Queen of Boston, and you made her bleed." Arthur pulled the trigger. The deafening crack of the gunshot shattered the elegance of the suite. Leo collapsed instantly, his chest completely blown out, his lifeless eyes staring up at the crystal chandelier. Arthur didn't even look down at the body. He turned to the two Russian lieutenants, who were now standing with their hands raised high in surrender. "Tell your boss," Arthur said calmly, tucking the gun back into his holster, "that the Costello family is no longer taking meetings. Now get out of my city." By the time Arthur returned to the Obsidian Club, the storm had finally broken, leaving the streets washed clean in the early morning light. The heavy mahogany doors of his office opened quietly. Dr. Harrison was gone, and the room was silent, except for the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Arthur stripped off his ruined suit, changing into a clean button-down shirt from his private closet before approaching the sofa. Clara was awake. The heavy dose of morphine had worn off slightly, leaving her hazy but aware. Her good eye tracked him as he sat gently on the edge of the cushions. "Artie," she rasped, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I'm here, Kara," he murmured softly, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of dark hair from her unbruised forehead. "I'm right here." She leaned into his touch, a tear slipping down her cheek. "The drive. Did they get it?" Arthur reached into his pocket, pulling out the small silver flash drive and placing it gently into the palm of her hand. "It's safe, and the men who took it will never, ever hurt you or anyone else again. It's done, Clara." Clara looked at the drive, then up into the fierce, protective eyes of the man who ruled the city. She knew what he had done. She knew the darkness that lived inside him. But looking at him now, all she saw was a man who loved her with a terrifying, absolute devotion. For her entire life, her weight had made her a target for mockery, for invisibility, and finally, for violence by men like Leo, who thought she was weak. But as Arthur leaned down, pressing his lips gently to hers, mindful of her split lip, she realized she had never been weak. She had just been waiting for a man strong enough to carry her crown. "You're going to be okay," Arthur promised, burying his face in her neck, breathing in her vanilla scent. "I'm going to take care of you. I don't care if I have to carry you everywhere for the rest of our lives. You are never leaving my side again." Clara let her eyes flutter shut, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, finding her anchor in the storm. "I'm not going anywhere, Artie. I'm right where I belong." Wow, Arthur did not hold back. Talk about absolute loyalty and a ruthless defense of the woman he loves. Clara and Arthur's bond is forged in fire and loyalty, proving true queens come in all shapes and sizes. Did you love this explosive Mafia Romance finale? If you did, please smash that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a protective mafia boss, and hit subscribe for more intense audio stories. Let us know in the comments, would you want an Arthur in your corner? See you next time.